Start the recording now. So,
okay, welcome. This is a workshop that is going to be focused on selecting and supporting recommenders. I think one of the key things that we want to demystify with this workshop. Oh wow, this need to fix this one. Let's fix this in real time.
we can spell, guys, please.
Fix this in real time. The key thing we want to demystify here is that asking for recommendations is not a transactional experience. That I think oftentimes, maybe none of you have the sense, but there is a sense sometimes that you need a recommendation for something. You go and ask your professor, say your professor, tell them when the deadline is, great, like don't talk to them again. That is not, that is a way to ask for a recommendation, but that is not the best way and a way that will help you get the strongest letters recommendation. So our goal with this webinar is to help you think through who is best positioned to write for you. So who should be on your team, especially since these fellowships require a good number of recommendations. And then also how to maintain that relationship in a way that will allow your recommenders to feel most confident and best positioned to speak to your credentials, achievements, and accomplishments in a way that will resonate with the particular fellowships. So that's our goal with this webinar. It'll probably be a shorter webinar, so we'll leave time at the end to answer any specific questions that you have, but of course, feel free as we go through to chat us in the chat box or even raise your hand. Okay. So why are recommenders? Why are recommenders so important? The main thing, and actually we could potentially disagree on this, but recommendations are definitely one of the most critical components of your application, if not the most critical component of your application, because they are the ones. So the selectors wouldn't just take your word for things. The recommenders are the ones who are corroborating your narrative and are backing up the things that you're saying in your application about kind of your interests, the way you've engaged with your interests, how you are positioned to pursue additional, say, graduate study, and go on to have an impact in your respective field. So the recommenders are corroborating that narrative and adding really rich detail around that put those accomplishments into context and in some ways then better highlight them. Especially if the recommenders are people who themselves are kind of well established in that field, because then that helps the readers really get a good sense of kind of where you rank or where you are in terms of the individuals that person has engaged with. And then the recommenders are also great at relating their experiences with you to the criteria that the fellowships are looking for. So kind of like leadership, ambassadorial potential, these kinds of things, they can back those up with the kind of specific details in which they've engaged with you. And so because of that, it's really important to choose your recommenders wisely. The recommenders that you might choose for a particular opportunity such as these might be different than a recommender that you might choose for a job opportunity. So I think the advice that we'll give you here will help you think actually more strategically about who to choose for a wide variety of opportunities that you might be applying to in the future. That's our goal here. Okay, Lauren, do you want to do this slide?
We didn't do introductions, but I guess it doesn't matter.
Oh, hi, I'm Laura.
I'm Lauren Tuckley. That's what my name down there says on the thing. So if you didn't know. So essentially, if you're thinking about applying for a UK fellowship or any number of fellowships or graduate school, you want to think about making that selection as it relates to fit, not just in terms of like how they know you, but in terms of what you're applying for. So you want to think about the linkage between you and what you want to do and the people that are basically going to say you're a good fit for this program or opportunity, right? So just as Laura had explained, just because you have, your core, maybe you've already had someone write a couple of recommendations for you and you're like, of course I'm going to go back to that person. Yeah, maybe, but maybe not too. Just because they've written for you before doesn't automatically mean they're going to be the best person to write for you again. It just depends on the opportunity you're applying for. And you want to think about matching the features of what you're applying for as it relates to the nature of the relationship you've had with your recommender. So some of those ways to like tease out the kind of dynamics that a selection committee might prefer. Some like categories or ways to think about this is how well they know you. So how well, you know, how and in what context they've seen and worked with you. Are they someone that you have a sense of that, you know, they would be delighted to support you? Like, you know, you kind of get varying degrees of enthusiasm based on the types of interactions you've had with faculty or professionals that might recommend you. You want to be able, you want to like have some detail there. So like if you've had a professor and you kind of show up to class and you're like, that's kind of the extent of how my professor knows me, is that I came to that class that one time, that one semester and did well. That may not, for the UK competitive fellowships, rise to the level that would be required to maximize your competitiveness, because that person's going to need to write upwards of 750, 1,000 words about their relationship and how they've seen you develop. Now, one of the things that we're going to always be kind of toggling back and forth between are how to pick the best ones and then how to support the ones that you did pick so that you can maximize the potential of what they're going to say. So there are ways to strategically think about support, and that's what we're going to get into in a minute. There's strategic ways to think about how you can help them, but you know, you have to pick the best ones first. One of the things that you might want to do, instead of just trying to think off the top of your head, the 3 or 4 that are going to be really good, think about this as like a really wide net. Who are all of the people, irrespective of like what you're applying for? Like if you were going to call on someone, who are all the people that would probably say yes to writing a letter for you? Then think about how they know you, when the last time you contacted them was, in what kind of context did you first meet them, and have you kept up that relationship? And were there any like outstanding things that you did in that class or in that research placement or in that professional setting that you think would be interesting? So you might want to illuminate the things that they would talk about on your behalf. And then once you sort of have that larger subset, you can start to narrow in once you know all the data points. So like sometimes we found that applicants may not be aware of a really good recommender that they didn't think was appropriate for their recommendation mix. And we're like, actually, yes, that's what we want to see. That's actually, you should, you know, reapproach or approach them instead of those that you've looked at. So I'm saying like, it's been our experience that this kind of landscape of your recommenders that you have and selection is not something that like, it's just automatic. So you're gonna have to think about it. You wanna think strategically about the selection process. One of the things that we like to encourage you to think about is your application has a number of features. You have your written materials, you have your transcript, you have, you know, other features, you know, like written materials can be everything from short answer to what you want to do in the long run to your personal statement. Then you have, in most instances, a slate of recommenders. Now, each of those places in your application, you want to kind of offer something a little bit new, right? You wouldn't necessarily want to have, so in terms of like thinking about how this has implications for your recommenders, you want to have a potentially nice sort of diverse mix of recommenders to really shine a different light on each element of your candidacy. So outside, and I think we're going to get to that in a minute, I'm probably preempting the next slide, but on the whole, thinking about those that have a fresh relationship to you, so that you didn't have, you know, the last time I talked to you was 2 years ago, is probably not going to be the best recommender. And then also you need to make note of, especially when we're thinking about academic letters, the way in which the person is recognized in their field of study. Those that have named chairs, that are full professors or tenure line associate professors, tend to carry much more significant weight when being evaluated for academic programs. So remember, UK fellowships are largely, in addition to funding kind of the long-term career that you have as an, you know, potential leader in your field, you're asking for graduate school. So you're also going to have to remember that like where you're aligning yourself with expertise it can be construed differently based on the authority and the position that your recommender holds. And if you have questions about that, because it's really not something they teach you, like what's an adjunct professor? What's like a visiting professor that's also like a full-time practitioner? You know, like some of these things are hard for you to really calibrate and understand the strength of that person's position in relation to what they're saying about you. So those are things you need to think about. And if you hadn't thought about that before, we need to help you parse out those features so that you can select the best set. Now, one thing before we move on, I think like you're not going to ever have like, you know, oh, I'm applying for the Rhodes and I have 8 brilliant letters and they're all going to be amazing and I know everybody. That just doesn't happen, right? So there's going to be varying degrees of fit in the recommendation slate that you actually end up with. So you should not necessarily discount yourself too early because you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to have like the best, you know, closest relationships with 8 people. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you're applying for. It depends on what, you know, maybe you have a whole bunch of strong letters. You might have one weaker letter, like that all kind of plays into it. So there's a lot of variability. So it's not like you just have to have it perfect, but you do need to think strategically about the best case for you.
Just to echo like a couple things here. So we say like it's ideal to have people who kind of are well established in their fields, who might have more authority, been, I mean, more established in terms of this field, who can then corroborate the ways in which you've engaged in that field. However, you wouldn't want to have a like full endowed chair professor write for you if, as Lauren said previously, if you'd only known them because you went to a large like lecture class and they didn't really know you. So like there's some of these things that you have to weigh. It'd be much more preferable to have someone who knows you well than have like someone who's kind of more established in that way. And then one thing I just remembered, like a frequently asked question that flabbergasts me in the nicest way is when people say, I don't want to ask this person because they've already written for me before and I don't want to bother them again. A couple things about that. One, this is professors' jobs to like write for people. I mean, this is like part of their professional lives is to write letters of recommendations for their students. So you should never be afraid to ask for a letter of recommendation from that perspective. And then 2, if someone has already written for you, it's much easier to adapt a letter to use for another kind of opportunity. So if that's a concern of yours, like kind of dismiss that concern right now for those reasons. Okay. Getting the yes. Oh, we haven't updated this.
I know it's like our subscription ran out, so now you guys get the
like now we're on like the free subscription.
the low rent version of our presentation. We apologize.
Yeah, but just to know that we use Canva and it's a great resource. Okay, so as we mentioned, getting a letter of recommendation is not a transactional experience in that you want to best support the person, give them the most information to help orient them to understand what they're writing for, what the criteria are, what kind of narrative you're going with in your application, because that helps them. And sometimes people say like, oh, but I'm afraid of giving them like too much information because like I feel like that's going to bog them down because I've already done this request. Like, no, it's actually much easier to write a letter of recommendation for someone when you have all of this information. Like they will love you for being able to provide this. So one of the first pieces, so actually maybe I should step back a little bit and talk about kind of like what the process might look like for asking a letter of recommendation before I talk about what is in that request. The first, like after you've done the, as Lauren said, like kind of like determining, mapping out who are all the potential people that have written for you, you've narrowed it down, you've decided like, these are my 4 people that I'm going to write for me, like, and now you want to proceed. Ideally, you might be able to, it's hard because now we're all virtual. Ideally, you might be able to have a conversation with someone in their virtual office hours, because it's always nice to be able to ask someone in person, or you can send them an email, which lays out the opportunity that you were applying for. So the description here of the program you are pursuing, kind of linking to the website, and asking, given your work with them in this kind of capacity, if they might be willing to write a letter of recommendation for you. The deadline would be June 1st for the internal deadline for the UK fellowships. If they follow up and say like, yep, happy to do so, this is great, then you might follow up with some of this additional information. Or actually in that first request, you can say like, and if you're willing, I'd be happy to follow up with additional kind of information, including like all the relevant info. So if they say yes, I'd be pleased to do so. Then you can follow up with a link to the program selection criteria, your resume and CV. It's helpful, we say here, relevant info about other rec writers, because it's helpful for someone to know the angle or like the lane that they are expected to address. Because sometimes people think that a letter of recommendation should be an exhaustive overview of everything that's on your resume. And it's helpful for them to know, like, given the fact that we did this work together in this course, and these are my other letter writers, I thought that you might be able to speak to blah, blah, blah. I mean, you wouldn't want to like give them kind of like an itemized list of everything you want to be in your recommendation letter, but it's helpful that for them to know kind of like what their lane is. So they stick to their lane and are not just kind of like doing that exhaustive overview of like, oh yes, and Laura also like bowls in her free time and enjoys like jogging. Like, I mean, that's not going to be the most relevant. You want them to speak specifically to the ways in which they know you. So that's why we talk about relevant info for other recommendation letters. And also because if you might have engaged with two professors in like a similar capacity, think about like the different angles that each of them can take. And it's helpful for them then to know that their other professor that they might work closely with is speaking to this angle so that they can focus on this other element. So that'll help you get like more kind of relevant details in that recommendation letter. And then descriptions of relevant research or projects. It's helpful to contextualize the work that you're doing. So if you took a course in like water security with this person, you can talk about the ways in which you've translated that interest into other spaces. So they have like that kind of greater sense of what you've been doing around those interests. And perhaps even explaining like the work that we did in this class actually informed these other projects I pursued. Like that's helpful for them to know in terms of, as Lauren was saying earlier, kind of like the evolution of your development. It's those cues are helpful. And then a draft of the application essay if possible. Now, our internal endorsement kind of packages here is going to look different than your traditional application essays, but it would still be helpful to provide your recommenders with a sense of like, this is kind of like where I see myself going in the future. These are the kind of issues that I will engage with, the space that I want to be in, and the programs that I've chosen to advance along those goals so that they can speak to that in terms of speaking to your potential to achieve in these areas. They have that to ground them and around which to orient their discussion. Okay, we'll move on. Lauren, do you want to take this slide?
Yeah. We also have a little handout that we can send around on the listserv when we, okay, or you can find it here as well. So we have like a little checklist that we put together that we think kind of summarizes the really helpful, it's there, the guide to supporting recommenders. It kind of outlines the basic supplementary materials that would be helpful for you to provide your recommendation writer so that they, again, have all of that in a single email. And this, again, comes after they've said yes. So it would be a little presumptuous to send this with the ask. So if they say yes, then one of the things that you would do next, in addition to outlining, more information around the dates of when things are due, and also, this will extend for potentially not necessarily the upcoming UK fellowships because your recommenders should be able to email. But in the instances that you're applying for other fellowships that use like an application management platform, or graduate schools that often use those recommendation platforms where the recommender should be submitting things, you want to get as much information as possible about what's involved in the process for submission. And that needs to be upfront at the beginning of your email when, again, then you send them this packet of materials. Those materials are meant to really just allow for them to see all of the information that would be helpful so that they can curate that and pull that out. Like, honestly, most of the recommenders are writing your letters the day before the deadline, if not on deadline day. And when you have done all of this work, I mean, if they don't already have a letter for you, if you've done all this work, you've directed them in certain ways in which you want them to attune to writing for you. It's also not, as long as you have a sense of the relationship that you have with your recommender, it's also helpful to sort of underscore, like, the most important thing about XYZ fellowship that I think you could attest to would be this sort of thing, this project that I did, blah, blah, blah. I've also attached, for your convenience, kind of the paper that most shaped my thinking, or you can add materials, you can direct their attention. Sometimes for particular instances of things in your application that you find to be your weakness, you could underscore that in your note to them and say, one of the things that I'm concerned about in terms of the perception of my competitiveness is that, during the pandemic, I had to withdraw from organic chemistry, but that then I took it in the summer and got like la la la. Like you can, instead of you having to explain away some of the things that could be perceived as kind of negatives, quote unquote, in your application, sometimes your recommenders are going to be best suited to address some of those for you. Now, that's not to say that like in all instances, the negative aspects of your application would always be appropriate for your recommender to address, but it's just another way to think strategically about all the elements of your application. So they say yes, you're including this list of relevant features. And again, one of the things that we might recommend that you do when you tell them when it's due is that you actually create a little internal deadline for them. So if you know that the deadline is, what is our deadline for?
June 1st.
Okay, so if it's the 1st of June, you might tell them it's like May something 30 or 28th or 29th, not Memorial Day, because that would be weird. But like you can tell them, and that's completely fine. Like it would be best that the letters come in at this deadline. That gives you a little bit of a buffer in case they end up, taking their cat to an emergency veterinary appointment on the day that your letter is due. That way, like you can build in a little bit of a buffer time there. So you should feel free to do that. And that's kind of best practice anytime you're asking for letters, to say like, yeah, well, the website says this. We've been guided to create a deadline that's not that.
Blame it on us. You can say the Center for Research and Fellowships is asking that recommenders get in their letters by.
Yeah, but this is the deadline. And usually they don't ask about it and they'll just do it by then anyway. So that gives you a little bit of a buffer. And then you can put in your calendar, when you get to be about a week out, especially if you ask in a timely way, if you've asked to give them enough time to really write for you and you've sent them all these materials, when you're about a week out from the deadline that you've given them, you might just sort of like circle back to the same thread. That way it kind of like pulls up all of the information that you'd sent in the first place after they confirmed with you, to just sort of say, just not checking in, but because you don't want to be checking in on them because you're in a subordinate position, but you can say, just writing with a friendly reminder that I'm sure that you're, whatever, but the deadline is a week today. And I just wanted to make sure that you didn't have any questions about any of the materials or whatever.
I like saying if there's anything else that you might need in preparation to submit. It's like a really nice way of being like, oh, this is a reminder, but like, is there any way that I can further support you?
Do you need anything else? I was thinking about whatever. Yeah. So kind of building in that allows for them to be gently reminded, and kind of saves everybody the stress of just not knowing, like, oh my God, I sent this to them 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. I think and you can even say in your email that you send them the first time, I'll circle back maybe about a week out just to make sure you don't have any questions. You could even say that, so then they're alerted to it.
And you always want to ask for a letter of recommendation. I mean, the bare minimum is 3 weeks in advance of a deadline, but I even think that's a fast turnaround. So giving someone weeks out, and then we always get like, well, when do I follow up with someone if I haven't heard back from them? I would, after you send an email or whatever, I would wait a week before, and this is why you want to give yourself advanced time to ask for letters of recommendation. I would wait a week before contacting someone. I would not contact someone the next morning after you emailed them the evening before and say like, just want to ping this email again, because there's nothing more annoying than like 12 hours after receiving an email, someone wants to like immediately follow up because everyone's busy and has things going on. So that would be the general time frame. Are we good with this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that was our slides.
Oh, that was it.
That was our kind of overview.
Well, let's talk about for the particulars of
Yeah. So the next thing would be, so we first wanted to do the general overview for kind of like all fellowships, but then thinking specifically about the Marshall and Rhodes, because I think there are particular considerations here. So first of all, and I think Lauren mentioned this as well, it's important to keep in mind that these fellowships are funding you to do graduate study in the UK. So they're automatically more academically focused than perhaps other opportunities might be that are maybe more kind of like a job, like host country placement or something like that. So Marshall, like the final application is actually 3 letters, and we were asking for 4 because we want to see who's on your team and who you might think are the best choices are not necessarily the best choices. So asking for 4, but those should all be academic in nature. They might even like specify specifically, Lauren, you might remember more so than I do about like what the exact phrasing of that is. We can check that out. And then Rhodes, I think it's at least half of the 8 for the US constituency have to be academic letters, if not 5. It's 4 or 5.
Yeah, while you're looking that up as well, this idea around academic letter of recommendation, you're like, oh my gosh, I was like a research assistant at UT over the summer and whatever. Does that count as an academic letter? So an academic letter it could be related. So there's a lot of different things that could be related to academic skill sets. And if you had a highly sort of like research intensive or some sort of educational developmental experience, it can be an academic letter if it's coming from someone in a quote unquote more academic position. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from Georgetown. Like if you had a internship at Brookings, like, and they were talking about the research that you did for, you know, the subgroup that you worked on over the summer, like that for a Marshall could be an academic letter, right? Now, you wouldn't want all 4 of your letters coming from more academic type internships or whatever, but it's really about the discrete skill set that they're talking about, you know, mastery over content, analysis skills, synthesizing information, writing, developing expertise. So long as sort of that's the skill set that your recommender is attending to, they don't necessarily have to be absolutely a professor at Georgetown. That said, it would look really strange if you didn't have any professors from Georgetown in your mix, but it's not going to have to be exclusively all Georgetown professors. We often see you might have 1, maybe 2 that are coming from, institutions that are academic-ish in nature, or the person that you worked for or under saw you in an academic capacity.
The Rhodes, like just to confirm, is a little bit more specific with regards to who those people are. So like the 8, this is for the US Rhodes constituency, you have to have the 8. It says provide a list of at least 5, but you need 8. And at least 4 of those people, and this should be academics who have formally taught or graded you in your undergraduate or, if relevant, postgraduate studies. One of those people for Rhodes should be someone who's in a position to comment on more of your kind of like leadership or kind of extracurricular, co-curricular engagement. And so that covers like 5 of your letters right there. And then you have some freedom beyond that. And then Marshall used to, I don't know if they still have it, there was a requirement that the majority of your letters had to be from people based in the US. I don't know if that's changed. Do you remember that, Lauren?
Oh, I can't remember about the basing in the US or not, but we can, again, Google is good, Marshall Scholarship, they have a website where you can go with information on these things. They have actually, it's quite handy, a little like document of, what are they called? The rules. Those are what it's called. Here you go. The rules are helpful in knowing what you should do, and they will explain any nuances around. I think we had come onto this last time when thinking about some of those degree programs that are ineligible for consideration. So here as well, you're going to find some information that specifies any of those little details about the recommenders, which they've changed this recently. That's my excuse for why it's not at hand.
It's actually, I think it's somewhere else on the page.
Okay, so it's not even in the rules.
Oh yeah, the first of these. Oh yeah, that's like the
right. You have a preferred recommender with a Marshall as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, at least that's right. Yeah, at least 2 of these recommenders should be in the United States, because we always have like people who've studied abroad and potentially like thinking about something close to them abroad. But 2 of those have to be in the United States. Okay. Questions about any aspect of this? Yes. I can't think of names right now.
Ashani.
Hello. I had two questions. The first one was on like what are the instructions for the June 1st internal deadline? Is it we receive the recommendations and then forward it to you? And then the second one is related to that, which is so for example, for the global constituency, it's only 5 recommendations. So what if, for example, I have like 6 and I don't know how to pick? Should I ask all 6 and get those to you, and then you would help me, like if we move forward?
Yes. Yes. I would always say, I mean, yeah, and I think Lauren agrees with me there too. I would always say that if you are deciding between recommenders, you can always have them all send their recommendation letters and then
Okay.
we can just make sure and help you determine who might be kind of best positioned to write for you moving on if you were selected for endorsement. But yes, you can certainly have all those people send their letters, and you were having them send their letters as attachments to fellowships@georgetown.edu. They should not be sending them to you guys to send to us, because the confidentiality issue would be a problem.
Right.
So,
and is there any of those like letterhead formatting stuff?
The guidance would be to use letterhead with a signature, kind of like their information and a signature. That would be the guidelines for them to, and they can send it to, like, at this stage, it doesn't make a huge difference, because if you were selected for endorsement, we will provide additional feedback with regards to like how to, you know, what salutation to use. I mean, for now, you could say they could use like to Rhodes or Marshall Scholarship Selection Committee. That's fine. But definitely, I mean, for now, using letterhead and having the signature, we don't want people sending their letters in an email. Like, they should actually be attachments, a Word or PDF attachment sent to fellowships@georgetown.edu. And yes, for individuals applying in different Rhodes constituencies. So I was on the US page, but there's different kind of requirements for, I mean, the requirements mostly stay the same. The main differences are with regards to like the number of recommendation letters that you need. But if you are in a different Rhodes constituency, you can go to your respective country region. Like I think China, you only need 4 letters of recommendation. So you can go there and click on information for candidates and find that information. And then also the thing here with regards to the information that you provide to your recommenders, like Rhodes for each of these, I can't go back now, but Rhodes has guidance for referees, kind of PDF. And you can certainly, if you are planning to apply for Rhodes, they haven't actually updated this, but you could say like, this is kind of like last year's guidance for their reference, because it goes over the criteria here. It goes over what Rhodes is looking for. So that can be a great way of hitting or like addressing a number of those things that we touched upon by sending them this PDF as kind of like just for their reference. And so they have that as well.
Yeah, just a few things. If you are going to have people send you more letters, you know, like, oh yes, I'm going to have someone send 6 instead of 4, and I'm a Marshall candidate. You need to give us a heads up that you are going to, so typically it would be good to kind of work with us so that someone in the office has made note that you're going to have more coming in, because if you know you're having 6 come in and we're just expecting 4, we're not going to know later that you were needing 2 more that haven't gotten in and your recommenders weren't able to, like, you know, meet the deadline or something. So make sure that you've given us a heads up if you're going to be opting into having more letters sent in so that we can advise you on which letters would best be suited to accompany your letter for selection for nomination, right? So it's a good idea to try to like maximize if you don't know. And it's also kind of helpful as well if you work with us, we can tell you, like, we can give you some feedback if you're particularly interested in how one of the letters is for you. It's like, oh, I've got this professor that, you know, I think I got a really strong letter, but I'm not sure. Later in the process, maybe not at the time when we're trying to get everything out the door, but at some point, if you'd like us to briefly review a letter or 2 for you in terms of like strength for possible future opportunities, that could be something that we hope to be able to provide you. So that
we're not telling you what's in a letter.
Yes, we won't be sharing them.
Yeah.
We'll be saying like, typically this letter talks about, you know, the research project you did last summer, talks about how, you know, you did a great job in the intro course and then how you took a graduate course or, you know, as an undergrad. They say some nice things about this. We can generally tell you we can tell you at the higher level what the content is. And then I would say, like, based on all the letters that we've seen, and I think like our positions are very interesting because there's like no other position in a university unless you're on like, I guess, an admissions team where you see that most like letters for the highest, like most competitive fellowships. And we see hundreds and hundreds of letters. So like we have a pretty good sense of if we say that's a good letter, like our data point, even though it could be anecdotal and it's our opinion, I think we're pretty expert. We have expertise in knowing like what letters are good and what letters aren't going to serve you so well. One of those things is just because a faculty member is renowned and you have the best relationship with them ever does not automatically mean they're good letter writers. And then you'd be surprised too. You'll find people that like, I didn't realize they could write so well and that they really, sometimes it's not just about the relationship, it's about the time they have to invest in writing the letters, their own normative expectations for what a letter of recommendation should do. And so like one of the things that one of the reasons why we started requiring the full slate of letters this year, like all of them, you know, so if you're a Marshall 4, if you're a US roads 8, and then whatever your letter requirement would be for those non-US constituencies for the roads, is that we also want to, like, if you do get nomination and you have a letter that we think might not stand up to the typical caliber of a letter for one of these competitions, we like to invite your recommenders to work with us to revise or update their letter based on, you know, eventually we can't require anybody to do that, but we do like to try to work to maximize all of the pieces of the application to the extent that we have the ability to offer that for you. But again, we're not going to be like telling you what's in the letter. We're not going to be giving them to you, but we can advise you on those things.
That was helpful. Thank you.
When did you see this?
What do they say?
No, I just wasn't aware that the Schwartzman.
Oh my goodness.
Interesting.
That's new.
Yeah, that's new. Interesting. We're learning things all the time as we open up.
Wow, we should put that on the listserv.
Yeah, we should. That's interesting.
Fellowship advisor listserv, like the nerds of fellowship that like share all the secrets with each other.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Other questions? Yeah.
I suppose this isn't directly related to this, but do you guys have like an open office hours link or on the website where we can go, or do we have to like schedule in an email every time?
I can take this. Laura was like, okay, so because we have quite a large volume of prospective applicants, what we would like to do in order to sort of streamline the process and allow for some of the preliminary information, which some of that can be captured like by you attending this today, would be to attend the series of workshops that we have. So we have another one. Well, we have some more. I don't have them to hand. We have too many workshops. To attend the preliminary series. So Problems versus Issues was last week. This week's Recommenders. We have another one on selecting UK graduate degree programs to kind of get those basics down. And then once those have been either attended, like you're attending this today, or you viewed those, that for those that can't join us synchronously, once that has been done, then we will be opening up our process for one-to-one advising, which will be more or less like, likely it will be an intake process where you complete like a Google form that says you attended those 3 things. We're trying to minimize the amount of times we say the same things over and over again so that like you get the basic information and then you can come with more strategic level like questions so that we can really get into your particular candidacy without talking about like how many letters you need or something like that. So it's coming, but not yet, but definitely this is one step in the right direction to get to those one-to-one appointments. And I wish we had time to not have those constraints, but we're just trying to satisfy a large interest across a number of programs. Speaking of, if you're interested, you should email fulbright@georgetown.edu. Should you be interested in other postgraduate fellowships? We're also in the middle of like advising a large number of Fulbright prospective candidates. Some of you might be counting yourself among those. So there's just a large volume. I'll stop now. That satisfied the question like 4 minutes ago.
Yeah,
Next.
Actually, a question pretty similar to what you just mentioned. If we are also considering applying for a Fulbright, is it acceptable to ask one recommender to write a recommendation for both the Fulbright and a UK fellowship? Or is it better to find recommenders who can do entirely Fulbright and entirely like Marshall, for example?
So this kind of goes to like that question the issue that I was addressing earlier, where people get afraid to ask for a letter of recommendation for something else because they've already asked that person. You always want the people that are best positioned to write for you for that opportunity. So if you have someone who, like in the Marshall case, like they want the primary kind of recommender, if you have someone who you've worked with closely and would speak in enthusiastic detail for you and would be a great recommendation for both the UK fellowship and Fulbright, you definitely want to ask them for both opportunities. You just want to do your part to make sure that it's clear the different fellowships that you're applying to, the different, like what those opportunities would look like for you in both cases. Like if you're applying to Fulbright for an independent research award, that's going to be a different kind of letter than if you're applying for, like, say, a Marshall to go do 2 one-year master's programs in the UK. So helping them, this same kind of like going through all the information that you need to provide them with like, this is kind of the information on Fulbright, maybe like having even like folders where you keep all the information that they need for each of these kinds of opportunity that they can just like link to that. So they have all the information that they need and the deadlines that they need. So for the UK fellowships, June 1st would be the internal deadline. For Fulbright, the deadline wouldn't be until September 1st. So
Yeah.
just that you've organized it for them and making sure that they know the differences between these opportunities.
Like I might even also suggest, since the recommendation deadlines are so far apart, they're like not really
Yeah, we're
aligned.
talking like 3 months.
Yeah, I would say like you could probably ask for both. I'm going to apply for a number of postgraduate opportunities, and I was wondering if you could serve as a recommender, and this is what I've da. Then you might prioritize getting them the information they need for the UK fellowships at this point, and then sort of say, like later in the summer when I've refined my project or my proposal for the Fulbright with a little bit more, intentionality or whatever, I'll circle back with more information about the Fulbright process. You just got to be careful, because if you send them Marshall and Rhodes and then also Fulbright stuff, sometimes it's like, what am I writing for? And then you run the risk of them writing the like
Template.
letter that has to do both, so they don't have to write 2 different, or one doesn't become adapted very well, that just sort of becomes, hybridized, and then it's like kind of not as persuasive because it's trying to speak to 2 different types of programming. On that note too, one of the questions that we often get is, I'm applying for consideration for both the Rhodes and the Marshall. So I will need 8 letters. Do I need to make a distinction, or do I need to have, my Marshall and Rhodes letter writers write 2 different letters, one for the Marshall and one for the Rhodes? No, your letter writers for internal nomination are writing for your nomination for UK opportunities through the Rhodes and the Marshall, irrespective of which one or ones you're applying for. So you still need to tell them, that like my plan would be with the Rhodes to do this and the Marshall to do this, to this extent that you know that. But when they write it, they can sort of say, here's how I know this person. Both plans through the Marshall and the Rhodes both are really aligned with their goals. So they can refer to both of them in the letter, or they can refer to this like conglomeration of UK fellowship endorsement. But at the end of the day, they don't need to be sending, your letter writers don't need to be duplicating their efforts and sending 2 of the same or like slightly various letters in the event that you're asking for endorsement for both. Does that make sense? But it's kind of, you're gonna have to communicate to them that like, this is endorsement for whatever it is that you have asked for, whether it's Rhodes and Marshall or just Rhodes.
Yevon, did you have a question, or we answered that one?
You mostly answered it. Thank you.
Okay.
Who else has questions?
Okay.
Wow, good. All the questions are answered.
I don't even know what our next webinar is. Our next webinar is next week.
It's on the UK thing, I think, on the UK thing. Of course it is.
Selecting
On
programs.
fellowships, something
I
about
think
fellowships.
our next UK fellowships webinar is on selecting graduate programs in the UK, and that's next week, and we will send out that information. And then we plan to send out this recording as well as a recording from the Prom versus Issue webinar either tomorrow or on Wednesday. So stay tuned for that if you missed the last one.
Yeah. Oh, there was one other thing, Laura, I was going to say. Gone.
Okay.
That's it. Yep.
Thanks for coming, Lauren. Do you want to stop recording so we're not